Hello viewers and welcome to a special video production for Warhammer 40,000 Conquest. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Quite some time ago, I started a series of Warlord-focused interviews which I took to calling community spotlights, and wanting to leave no project incomplete, today I seek to finish that series in discussing the last of our Planetfall Cycle Warlords, the Eldar Talyesin Fharenal. So, George, it's been far too long since I've last had you on in a video, so please take a moment to reintroduce yourself and let our viewers and listeners know just how it is that you're involved in the Conquest community.
Yeah, I like to really contribute in the Skype group. I also like to play on Octagon when time permits, and I play in my local meta. You know, I really like to theory craft a lot about the game, and not just view it as a card good or bad, but why is this card good, and in what situations like this bad card good.
Sure.
You know, and I feel like the Skype group is like the perfect outlet for that. And if anybody that's listening to this does not take part in the Skype group, I definitely recommend checking it out.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a join. It's kind of like a think tank of some of the best and brightest that Conquest LCG has to offer, so it's great to have you back in a video, as I always appreciate interacting with you via private messaging in the Skype group, whatever format it happens to be. But since it has been quite some time since I last had you on and we talked in depth about Subject Omega X 62113 when he'd only been previewed, why don't you give us a little bit of a reminder? How exactly did you get involved in gaming? What was your history in playing games? And how did that eventually turn toward Conquest?
Yeah, I think I started playing Magic probably when I was like 11 or so. I was a young kid. Had never played a game before like that. Didn't know what I was doing. I think at one point, when I first started playing Magic, I was the worst ranked player on DCI. No joke.
Like in the world or in the nation, or?
I don't know how DCI was separated at the time. It was at least the United States, you know, for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe in the world, you know. I didn't really understand like the concepts behind card games, the fundamentals, you know, card advantage, how to read your opponent, anything. I was just a kid. I was your traditional Timmy player. I was playing, you know, a mono green ramp to play big fat fatties to swing at my opponent for massive amounts of damage.
Well, it seems like your playstyle's probably changed ever so slightly since then.
Most definitely. And then, you know, I got into Warhammer 40k, and I played that for a while. Cut grass all summer so I could put together a Tyranid army, you know, when the game was mildly affordable. And then, you know, I've just played games off and on, you know, for a while, you know, whenever I've had the time. And then Conquest came out, and I really liked the idea of playing, you know, 40k in an affordable format because I love the universe. I read a lot of the books, and that's really what allowed me to get a big interest in this game and actually try and take it to the next level.
Sure. Well, now that Conquest has been out a year and a half, maybe a couple of years by now, why bother sticking with it? A Game of Thrones saw its reboot. It seems like everyone is playing Netrunner, and of course, Magic is probably going stronger than ever, but why stay faithful to Conquest LCG?
Well, I think it's the most rewarding game as far as player skill, and in just the type of game that evolves between two players. I guess like trying to meta your opponent is the easiest way to describe it. I don't really think too many games offer that opportunity in the midst of while playing the game, especially in an affordable format. I mean, there's just a huge breadth of skill. There's always more to learn. There's always more to develop your own play style. and I think different warlords also play differently, even within their own faction. And I think that's also why you probably have me talking about this warlord in particular today.
Right. Well, I guess spoiler alert, you're here to talk about Talyesin Fharenal, the third revealed Eldar warlord. Eldarath was the core set option. We saw Baharoth in the Warlord cycle, and of course, Planetfall ushered forth Taliesin in the very last war pack, so she hasn't been out for that long, but you've seen some pretty significant competitive success with her. You're a master theory crafter, if I don't say so myself. You're always thinking, how can I get the most value out of this? How can I pull off some sort of cool combo? So I suppose just in looking at this third option here, let's talk about her a little bit. What does she do particularly well that maybe sets her apart from Eldarath and Baharoth?
Well, it's actually a pretty simple answer. She boosts the combat effectiveness of Eldar units.
Sure.
And I remember when I first started getting into this game, somebody had made a graphic with the cost of units compared to their stats. And Eldar actually had the most expensive units with the lowest stats for how much you're paying, with orcs being on the exact end of the opposite end of the spectrum.
Okay.
But Eldar make up for this by having very powerful abilities on their cards. Such as Built-in Guardians has 2 command icons. Swordwind Farseer allows you to tutor a card. Their uniques happen to have very bad value for what they cost, but they also allow you to play Nullify with little to no risk, which is a huge value in of itself. So what this Warlord does is allows you to actually play a completely different game compared to Eldarath or Baharoth, where Eldarath wants to play a threat and then selectively either control or destroy whatever your opponent has that can deal with your threat,
Right.
by either tapping it, Archon's tearing it, or killing it with the Starbane's Council. And Baharoth really wants to just, I guess, force you into making mistakes with mobility and just dominating command to get an overwhelming board advantage at the end game to win. Because probably if he doesn't do it, he can't win. And then what she does is she wants to actually out-attrition your opponent. She just destroys combat math. She's not better than Eldarath's at Eldarath's game. She wants to play a ton of weenies to dominate command, whether it be Slith Mercenary, Incubus Warrior, Built-in Guardian, Taliesin Spiders. And then by the end of the game, when you're going to the final planet, you have this huge army of units where you've been dominating command, choking your opponent for resources, and now your numbers are significantly better from the stat buff she provides.
Yeah, I mean, I would hate to call her the Colonel Strachan of the Eldar, but it's a very similar ability, but I think maybe Broderick War is a much more flattering comparison to make, where if you can play just a large volume of units, the more times you can individually benefit from her plus attack and plus HP ability, then you could potentially just be seeing huge benefits from that effect.
Absolutely, but I would say you could actually compare her more to Strachan than Broderick War, because she obviously has to be at the same planet.
Right.
But the flip side is none of Strachan's command units become combat units. You know, if Iron Guard Recruits was a soldier, or Sanctioned Psyker was a soldier, I'm not saying it's thematic, maybe Iron Guard Recruits, right? But it would significantly up his game. Or Rattling Deadeye. But in this case, the units that you use in Eldarath to dominate command are the same units you use in Taliesin. And in fact, if you look at my Taliesin deck, the deck is actually fairly similar to the same deck I ran in uh, the last Octagon WOG before it became the Black Crusade to get second place. I just took almost the exact same deck, updated it to the current cards that were out, and it just the combat math just destroys a lot of people. A lot of things that would kill you, they don't do it anymore. And now it takes 2 attacks, and you kill a lot of things in 1 attack.
Well, since we are talking about how she kind of has to put herself in jeopardy to confer her benefit to friendly units, warriors and psychers, and we're starting to touch on some of her signature cards, let me deviate slightly from my standard interview format here, and let's talk about some of your favorite units, combos, cards, and things like that. So I suppose, let's just start off by saying, when it comes to using Taliesin as a unit, how do you strike a balance between gaining her ability on your units, but not, risking her getting bloodied really early on?
It really comes down to judicial use of Dire Avenger Exarch and knowing the capabilities of your opponent. Like, against Space Marines, you cannot walk into a drop pod assault and eager recruit trap.
Sure.
That, you can't really do that against anybody, but obviously it's much more punishing for her since her deck style does revolve around her not being bloodied. But I usually find with Dire Avenger Exarch, it is very tough to deal with her, and it's actually quite easy to get one fairly frequently with my inclusion of Swordwind Farseer and Gift of Isha. Beyond that, I usually almost never commit my Warlord to Planet 1. I actually don't leverage her ability until I'm using it more like a spell, like an Empower or an Event.
Right.
To actually trump combat. I'm usually actually just sniping most of the game to just gain incremental advantage repeatedly. Looking for... Because I will, the way I commit my units or deploy my units on the planet, I will often not deploy units to planets where I want to trigger the battle ability, so my opponent will deploy a unit there, so not only will I snipe it and kill his unit, I'll also trigger his battle ability.
Sure.
Which is a little bit more of an advanced deployment strategy. A lot of people don't take advantage of that. I'll focus on drawing cards all game. So I can get those Dire Avenger Exarchs, and then you have quite a few control options with Archon's Terror and Nullify to protect your Warlord as well from being bloodied. It is a risk with her, I think, but I never got bloodied the entire regional I took her to, except for the first game, which I got bloodied on the very first turn against a Ragnar. Yeah, that was a doozy. He had a war camp and an outpost out there on the first turn, and the first planet was a Tricon, and I thought surely he's going to go there to win and just, steamroll because he had initiative. And I one command at the 3 other planets because he spent all of his resources on those supports. And I went to planet 2 where nothing was deployed to win command there at 4 planets, and he met me there and bloodied me on the first attack.
Well, yikes, I think is appropriate, and I don't know if I would wish that on anyone. Well, I suppose I can think of a few people, but that is a very rough start to a game.
Yeah, it was a delicate balance of me hiding behind a Dire Avenger Exarch with a Gift of Isha for the rest of the game.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I guess just because her signature squad is so full of tricks and it's so diverse because she's got 2 copies of 2 different units, do you have any, next level ideas for how to use either Taliesin's Spiders or the Warlocks or her signature event, Path of the Leader? Any just really strong recommendations for how to get the most use out of those cards?
Yeah, well, I think probably her signature pod is actually one of the strongest in the game. It's probably not as strong as Kato's. It's It's probably up there with Eldar, though, and I know that's like a shocker for me to say, but Taliesin Spiders is probably my favorite SIG unit in the whole game, and it's easily in the top 5 as far as strength goes. During one game in the regional, in the elimination rounds, I was against Kugath, and I deployed one to Planet 4 and one to Planet 5. And I had also, earlier that turn, deployed a Swordwind Farseer to Planet 3 as a Tricon, because I wanted to go ahead and get a Psyker out there, draw a card, and win command there, because I knew I was going to fight at that planet. Planet 1, I had like a Warlock Destructor. Kugath deploys a bunch of units to Planet 1. We get in a big blowout fight, but he actually commits to Planet 3. During the battle at Planet 1, I end up moving both spiders to Planet 1 to fight there to win the battle. At Planet 3, he attacks the Swordwind Farseer, and I shield the damage. He moves 1 damage over. I attack with the Swordwind Farseer, and then move both of the spiders over. Like, yep. I mean, it's just gross.
I was just going to say, I liked these units to start, putting them out for command and then moving them when it's time to fight. But the first time that I had someone move them from the HQ to a planet, I just suddenly gained like a whole new level of respect and fear of the spiders.
Yeah, when they were at 4 different planets in one turn, it's just outrageous. It's unparalleled amount of mobility, and even without her stat buff at a 2-cost unit, they're way above curve at a 2-3 with that kind of mobility.
Yeah.
And then with her stat buff at like a 3-4, it's outrageous.
Well, and then I suppose the other side of the Psyker Warrior coin is Taliesin's Warlocks. Naturally, they make fantastic allies played in conjunction with Dire Avenger Exarch. But what kind of play experiences have you had with those?
Yeah, they're really strong as well. They hit for 4 with her ability. They hit for 3, which is a great attack value anyways. They're not necessarily... I think they're probably about equal for their cost with a 3-2 stat line and a powerful ability. In my deck build, I happen to run 31 units, which is a lot higher than I normally do. I normally run about 27 units. So this allows me to, and you end up drawing a bunch of chuds as the game goes along, like Sliss, which you don't always want to play depending on the game state. And that allows you to do something with them in the middle of the combat round. And their ability, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually by combat round, so you can do it multiple times.
Yes.
Multiple combat rounds. And they're just very strong when you start chain gunning people down. Like, especially if they're hiding behind a Dire Avenger Exarch. It's like, what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, just like these spiders can be relocated, I've seen the Warlocks during combat round 1 when they're at a different planet. Maybe they showed up with someone's Warlord exhausted. You discard a warrior card to ready them, and then during the next combat round, maybe you use Path of the Leader to exhaust them and move them to a relevant planet, and then you discard another warrior card, and then you score an unexpected bloodying or something ridiculous.
Yeah, that's actually a really strong assassination vector with her, is that a lot of people just don't see that coming, and maybe it has to do with that she's not played that frequently, but that does happen, and it's pretty strong when it does.
Sure.
And you already talked about that, I guess. What's next from Path of the Leader? Path of the Leader is just an all-star card. In fact, it really hurts me if I ever have to use it as a one-shield. Gaining 1 resource on the first turn is absolutely nutty, like with her cost curve. My deck has a 1.7 average curve. It usually does about 4 to 5 deploys on the first turn. That, can probably take it up to 6, if I really, really need to. Or it can turn like a less good opening hand, into a very much more aggressive one.
Sure.
When you...
I guess what is like the most common effect that you're using for Path of the Leader? You get the resource, or you can have a warrior get +1 attack for the remainder of the phase, or you can exhaust a psyker to move it from one planet to another. Is there like a typical way that you do implement that one?
It probably ends up being the gain 1 resource, just for like the surprise combat play. Sometimes you can do like a surprise gift of Visha on somebody, Arterra they didn't see coming. And then the third option to move a Psyker is pretty strong as well, just setting yourself up for future combat downstream or giving yourself a bonus when your opponent didn't think you had it. The +1 attack, I don't think I've actually ever used that option once on it.
Yeah.
I mean, what's +1 attack? You know, I'm not. The other effects are way more powerful than 1 attack.
Sure.
If your opponent's got a shield, they got a shield. You know, I usually feel like with her, you're overkilling something in 1 attack, or you're not killing it 1 attack, anyways.
Right. Well, makes sense to me, and I suppose while we're kind of riding the highs of Taliesin, what are some of her favorable matchups? We've talked about a lot of her strengths and her cool little tricks that she can do, so what pairings allow her to best flex her muscles?
Well, like I said, because she does the game differently than Eldar, she has different matchups. She trades probably a little bit weaker Marine matchup because she has less control to go around. Honored Librarians are an especially large threat if you pretty much have to save your terrors for them. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say the matchup's unwinnable. I think it's actually fairly winnable. You just have to play knowing your outs, and you can't make mistakes. But, you know, Conquest, you can't really make mistakes anyways.
Right.
But, like, the war matchup, I actually feel is actually fairly favorable. In fact, there was one turn where I just, like, in the regional, I just shithoused a war player. Turn 1, I have a Path of the Leader, so I'm able to play a Swordwind Farseer. There's 5 green out there, and I'm just 5 green planets at opening flop against war, and I'm shitting bricks. And he has the initiative, and he just drops his entire hand on the table with like an ammo depot and like 1-for-1s on every single planet. You know, it was just outrageous. I ended up using Path Leader for a Swordwind Farseer, and I'm looking for like my favorite tech card in the world, which is Eldritch Storm. And I find it, and oh man, it was gross. He just ate it. He just ate that whole Eldritch Storm. It was just in a completely unrecoverable position.
Yuck. Well, I mean, it's nice as war when you play your entire hand, but when your hand subsequently disappears, that's not so good anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it was painful for him. Outside of that, I think the Kith matchup's a lot better. You have a lot more bodies to go around. A 2-1 isn't as scary because they don't one-shot your guys as much, and you can trade them tit for tat for units.
Sure.
Orcs, Chaos. Chaos is just not a good match. Like, I think Eldar are just favored against Chaos just because of Nullify, Gift of Visha. You know, they just kind of innately counter Chaos in my experience, you know, between the fragility of the Warlords and how they want to use a lot of their resources on expensive events like Warp Storm and Firestorm.
Sure. And you just easily undermine all their efforts.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like you just traded a slightly worse Marine matchup for a way better War matchup and Kith matchup compared to Eldar, and that's actually a really fair call in the meta. At least in my opinion, just because there's a lot more war.
It definitely does seem like it, and I suppose just because it's not in my nature to be so positive and optimistic for long, what about some of her worst matchups? Like, where does she struggle, and what factions, what warlords can kind of pick her individual strategic elements apart?
So, I mean, generally, like, even though I said she can beat war, the alternative economy, she has very strong economy. She probably she does exactly what Eldorath does. So she has some of the best command in the game. But anybody that can just do alternative economy with Ammo Depot or Kato's ability to generate a resource, there can't be tough things to deal with, because with her, you just want to drag the game out attrition your opponent. And anybody that can actually just straight up hit it with an aggressive flop. She does have some cards that can... It's not like game over if somebody can do just an aggressive play with her, because with Dire Avenger Exarch, and Taliesin Spiders and Warlock Destructor, you do have, some things that can respond to your opponent's aggressiveness, especially with Archon's Terror. But I definitely think her worst matchup is probably Kato, just because his ability to cheat in a lot of fatties while still generating a lot of resources is a tough one.
Sure. Well, I guess let's touch on some of the things that differentiate her from Eldorath and Baharoth. Since she focuses on Psychers and Warriors, cards like Mind War and Shuriken Catapult come immediately to mind. But what are some of the cards that she tends to use that we may not see as frequently with some of our other warlords? Like, what really sets your Taliesin deck apart from your other Eldar?
Really just like Swordwind Farseer is the big one. It's kind of hard to play it for a 2/2 for 3 in regular builds, especially because both of their Eldar decks have 3-cost SIG units. And Swordwind Farseer's effect is just really, really powerful when you know what card you need to handle a certain matchup. It allows you to get what you need when you want it. And, that's just a big deal in a game that's about variance and controlling variance.
Well, I guess when it does come to, specifically the Psyker favoring Mind War and the Warrior favoring Shuriken Catapult, do you include either of those?
No, I don't really like either one of them, unfortunately. Shuriken Catapult, I guess, is kind of cute, but it's kind of just easy to deal with, because you're going to be what you really want to do is have a Dire Avenger Exarch out there, and I hate to keep going back to that card. That card really just allows the whole deck to stick. I guess you could view it as a pseudo way to protect your Psychers or your Warlord by putting it on something that has to be answered.
Right.
But if I was gonna include that, I'd probably just ally with Tau and do an Ion Rifle, because for 1 cost, doing it in the deployment phase or doing it in the combat phase, really, there's not that much of a trade-off, Yeah, your opponent sees it coming, but if your opponent can't answer it, your opponent can't answer it either way.
Right, and it seems like just from your general playstyle, your damage comes from just trying to swarm with units and keeping all the individuals alive for as long as possible, as opposed to some cute ambushing something into play and unexpectedly killing something out of nowhere.
Yeah, and while I haven't actually played it, I have put together a Tau deck that kind of does that, and it seems nice on paper, but I don't really think Warlord Assassination is a valid way to plan around winning the game.
Sure.
It's always there, and it's something everybody needs to look out for, but a good opponent isn't going to get assassinated or killed unless he was going to lose the game anyways.
Sure. And it's just such even the warlords that are best at it, like Anshi and Ragnar and Torquemada, it's inconsistent at best. So
yeah, like that one game, the guy bloodied me on the first turn, and I just ran away from him all game.
Right.
And when I couldn't, I just hid behind something, and I planned my battles around having initiative so I could run away as my first action if I had to.
Sure.
I guess you were talking about a key unit. The Dire Avenger Exarch is such a key unit, and I just want to get into why real quick. Besides forcing your opponent to attack warriors, the thing is it really screws up your opponent's combat math, because you will have warriors that they can attack that they want to attack, like Slith Mercenary and Incubus Warrior, which would be a 4-2, which is just, that's kind of terrifying stat numbers. So your opponent's going to have to attack them first, right? So that they kill your Incubus Warrior, and now they get the option to whittle down your Dire Avenger Exarch, which let's say they do. Okay, then you gift a Visha, and now they're like, oh fuck, I should have been attacking the other warriors the entire time.
Sure.
You know, or let's say you don't have a gift of Visha. By this point, they've whittled through a 5 health unit. They can either go for a 2/6 Warlord, or they can go for a 4/3 Warlock, Taliesin Warlock, or, so it's just like, I'm not really sure what the correct answer is to solving her an attack priority. Like, if you're fighting against her. I mean, she just really screws up combat math so hard. Yeah. Obviously, if you just go down to a planet and she's free to attack her, because then, but if your opponent's playing the game right, you're not going to present they're not going to present Taliesin to be torn apart like that,
Sure. And I guess especially the fact that she can use Path of the Leader to change her number of resources, that could just be a very, very difficult thing to predict indeed. But, George, let's say a player is interested in getting Taliesin up off the ground. Do you have any, suggestions for how someone can start to formulate a strategy around, trying to snipe economy units, trying to play out combat units, to pick and choose your battles? Just any thoughts when it comes to starting a game to piloting your way, hopefully, toward a win?
Yeah, usually, not usually, I pretty much do it exclusively now, and it took me a while to get in the habit, is while I'm looking at the planet flop. I'll probably take about 5 minutes at the start of the game and just really examine the planet flop, look at the battle abilities that are present. Actually, the first thing I always look at is the initiative order of the planets. What planets will I have initiative on? What planet will my opponent? Because I feel that's clinched more games than not when all things else were equal. So I feel like it's hugely advantageous to play for a win condition that can be in your initiative. Then I'll look for key battle abilities, things that I want to trigger. The things I don't want my opponent to trigger. I love to trigger Barless. I think it's just one of the shittiest planet abilities, and I think if they ever did it, I hope they redid the planet lineup. Hope they'd get rid of it. I think random discard is just really unfun. So I just choose to leverage it against my opponent as much as possible, getting rid of Tempest Blades and things your opponent can't afford to play on turn 1, but they really want to, which is why they kept their hand. And forcing them to discard it is just, it's priceless, because you got to think, if opponent deploys 4 cards, maybe they win 2 command struggles, they draw 2 more cards. They got 6 cards in hand. You have a 1 in 6 shot of sealing the reason why they kept that opening hand,
Right. Well, what about maybe from the opposite end of the spectrum? Because you've touched on a fair bit of strategy before, and just really picking your battles, trying to favor initiative so you can really milk each and every stat out of every one of your units. But if somebody's on the receiving end of Taliesin and they're finding themselves just totally outcompeted when it comes to these, large in number, powerful in statistics units being pit against them, how can someone try to win against Taliesin?
Yeah, I think there has to be a fair amount of forethought when you go to play here. I wouldn't say she's an easy or even a medium level warlord. She's definitely in the difficult branch, because you just can't make a mistake. You have to have a lot of forethought about where you're committing your units, where you're gonna, so you can trigger your warlord ability. In the regional, I never once failed to have the problem of triggering my warlord ability. It was up every single time when I needed it to. But I guess a canny opponent could look ahead and maybe do some aggressive counter snipes of his own to rob you of the opportunity of having a psyker that was sitting out there to be leveraged later on, our warrior, so I would definitely look at that. She's very weak to Aatrox Prime, very weak, because her health disappears when they go back to the HQ.
Right.
So it's quite possible to put to put your an opponent where they're all 1 health from dying, they go to the HQ and they all die. In fact, in the finals, that's actually what took me out. Is the planet lineup forced me into a way where I had to keep fighting my opponent at planet 1, and the Aatrox Prime was downwind, and he was able to get like 2 triggers off against me in a row, and it was harsh.
Yeah, that definitely hurts. It's rough enough when like a Sakalem Shrine Guard ends up getting killed because it moves to your HQ, but when it's half of your army, that's even worse.
For sure.
Well, something else I'm kind of wondering about is because Eldorath in the core set has been, he's kind of come and gone, but I think calling him a reasonably competitive or at times tier 1 warlord is totally fair. Baharoth, not so much. But how do you think that Taliesin falls? Do you think that she has like the stuff that a tier 1 warlord is made of? Or is Eldorath going to be like the undisputed king?
She definitely has the stones to compete, but I don't. I want to say she's tier 1, or she's just right outside of tier 1. I mean, maybe I'm jaded, right? Maybe I just like her that much. But I would say she does have a very big problem with the units that are going to be designed for her. Are going to have the warrior psyker trait, so when they're being designed, they're going to take her into account. It's not going to be like a whoops, you got this kind of thing. And that's usually when something gets really crazy powerful, is when there's like a unforeseen combination. So do I ever see her just go, oh no, this is the one card that did it for her? No, I kind of see her staying right where she's at. If you want to play a different game than Eldorath, if your meta's looking a little bit different than something than he can handle, but I think, drone defense has really helped him out. That really helped his ability to handle Swarm.
Sure.
So, he's got a lot of cards in his toolbox right now that are readily available to him. So, and I don't really just see her getting something that was like, oh, surprise. Maybe if she gets, like, just some wicked attachment or event, that for some reason Eldorath can't use, could just boost her over him. But I could see her probably just being a little bit less than him just because Eldorath is so oppressive at any skill level against people.
Sure.
Like, if you don't know how to play against Eldorath, you're just going to get demolished. He's really good at just taking advantage of your mistakes, showing up to a planet and winning when a fight that you thought he was good, had no shot of winning.
Yeah. Well, and not to disparage Eldorath players by any means, but I think show up at a planet and exhaust something is a little bit more straightforward than try to strike a careful balance between staying at a planet long enough to augment your other units and make sure that all these combo pieces are working together. So it's definitely a step up in what Taliesin asks of her pilot, but she can do some pretty cool stuff. But, George, I appreciate so much you're coming on and talking about a rather complicated warlord here, but just because you're such a experienced and talented player, do you have any more just global general thoughts, advice, and suggestions for how someone can try to become a more talented player, whether it's Eldar or Taliesin or just anything in general?
Yeah, just master the command dial. I mean, it's so important. Being able to blend a cohesive deployment strategy into a commitment strategy is just if you can do that, that's going to take your play to a next level. Because a lot of players, they focus on each phase of the game in of itself. This is my deployment phase. I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to react to what's gone on in my commitment phase. Usually before I've even deployed my first unit, unless something just unexpectedly happens during the deployment phase, I already know where I plan on committing my warlord.
Right.
I already know where I plan on fighting my first battle, which may not even be for 4 planets down. I'm very key to let my opponent win, till they have 2 icons of every color if I can help it. If I think it will put me in a good enough lead to just knock them out of the game and kick the legs out from underneath them.
Sure. And not that I've played, a tenth as many games as you, but just viewing things from the mindset like what free battle ability or what free card effect would I like to pursue? What opportunistic enemy unit can I try to shut down and flip command in my favor? Or how can I try to dismantle an opponent's economy or, their combat potential before they really get things up and running? And I suppose just, minimizing the number of wasted resources in the form of over deploying to planet number 1, and then those units get trapped in your HQ, and then they show up exhausted. But yeah, I think just viewing the entire 4-round turn structure as some just cohesive thing, as opposed to 4 different entities.
Mm-hmm. And, the big key to that is to not get so far caught up in the long game that an opponent doesn't blindside you with something.
Sure.
Especially Space Marines, Space Marines and Eldar, it's the reason why both of them are tier 1, is they're both very good at just being surprise, you thought you were going to win this battle, you're not now. Because you didn't commit enough forces, and now I drop potted assaulted 2 guys and an eager recruit. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Eldorath is I sent 1 home, I brought a guy back, and I tapped another. It's hard to explain how to deal with all that. It's, when it's a planet that you have to win the game, commit enough to win the game. Who cares if you overcommit, because you're not going to win the game otherwise.
Sure. I guess that's a mistake I've made myself when I was a less experienced player than I am now, where I try to be a little bit too risky, or I gamble too much. I'll maybe, if I'm for sure going to be losing the game, if I lose a battle at a certain planet, maybe I'll still send my warlord elsewhere or something, just to try to get as much value as possible and efficiency out of my units as I can, and then maybe I end up falling prey to some sort of unexpected trick or turn of events, and then it's the entire game is out the window.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. Just being able to know everything that your opponent can do goes very far in Conquest. Knowing how your opponent plans to win the game is just extremely important. And another thing that can help take your play to that next level is stop feeling compelled to win the game, but actually figure out how can you dismantle your opponent from winning the game.
Right.
And Conquest just offers a lot of ways to interact with your opponent through the battle abilities and through how much card draw is available in your deck. I've actually gotten quite fond of starting to run 2-ofs and 1-ofs of certain key cards that I don't always really want to see, but are very good in the correct situations, especially in problem matchups. A big one is Eldritch Storm, which I think a lot of Eldar players just have kind of glossed over, but it's a total house. It just during the regional that I took it to, I think 5 out of the 8 games, it just caused an opponent to shit the bed.
Yeah. It really is just a card or two like that comes out at the wrong time or the right time, and it's just maybe sometimes it's I forgot that card existed, and then sometimes it's Wow, I was really hoping you didn't have that, that sowing chaos when I've got all my 2 or lower cost dudes stacked on blue planets.
For sure. And it's like Empower. I used to run Empower as a 3x, and I've moved it down to a 1x because I don't want to actually ever cast it most of the time.
Sure.
But sometimes, every once in a while, it is exactly the card you need to get you out, of the hole that you're in. So I would definitely like experiment with also cards that, you know, what's the one Space Marine trick that they got in the Great Devourer box? Vengeance?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know why anybody doesn't run that card. Like if you sub one Crushing Blow for one Vengeance, and then occasionally you just completely dick your opponent over, it's worth it, because usually the threat of a Crushing Blow is actually way worse than actually crushing blowing somebody, unless you're bloodying their Warlord with it,
Sure.
But how often do you have like 2 or 3 in your hand?
Yeah. Well, and I suppose at the very least it never hurts to experiment, and if your sneakier tech cards don't end up working out, it's not like you can't eventually pull them out of your deck when it comes time to, sit down at your regionals or nationals or worlds, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I definitely think, speaking of regional, like worlds, if I was able to go, I'm confident enough her that I would probably run her at worlds, unless just like, I think Veziel is like heads over heels better, which, I mean, he's probably pretty S tier, but,
Well,
let's not get into that.
Sure, I suppose only time will tell, but, George, thank you so much for coming on and humoring me again. You suffered through one community spotlight, and now you were good enough to do another. I suppose if anybody would like to get in touch with you, maybe they've got some questions about Taliesin or Subject Omega or really any Warlord, or they just want to talk Conquest, how might someone go about reaching out and getting a hold of you?
Card Game DB, Octagon, name is Grendel, like the mythological monster and the comic book villain that is like the evil version of James Bond / Batman.
And that about sums you up. So, thank you so much for coming on, George. Dear viewers, dear listeners, if at any point you want to get in touch with me, I'm the Hive Tyrant on Facebook and I'm on Twitter. If you ever have any inclination whatsoever to continue to support my unending endeavor to keep covering Conquest LCG, I'd be absolutely honored and humbled and deeply appreciative were you to make a small donation to my Patreon page. But as always, thank you once again for listening, and be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come.